Peace, peace, peace. Hello, Sister Gertrude.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, peace and blessings, sis. How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing so good, so good. Let me see if I can get my camera going on. Boom, boom, boom. All right, pieces. How you doing? How was your day today?
It was all right. I'm getting through the day.
Okay. No, I heard that. I feel that. I definitely appreciate you making time today. I definitely appreciate you considering us always being just a call away. If you had a quick moment just to introduce yourself and tell the people about your current work, what would you say and how should we, respond to you?
First and foremost, educator. First and foremost. Um, and on top of that, just I would call myself an educator activist. Being in this profession and just seeing all the wrongs and trying to help make some rights. So that's how I would describe myself in this space.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for being here today. The first question, I guess we could just hop right into it is um, how would you define Black intelligentsia and how can you relate that definition to your current work?
I think Black intelligentsia is moving beyond schooling. I think that it's understanding that the way we've been schooled, especially in a U.S. context, is rooted in anti-Blackness, and I think Black intelligentsia is understanding that
Mhm.
and moving beyond those standards that are set, beyond all the policies that tell us, that we aren't smart enough, that tell us that we don't meet certain standards. I think it's rooted in knowing true histories, knowing your real histories, and knowing all the stories that have been concealed from us, and using that um, to expand what you know, and then also share that information.
Absolutely. And how was your current work? If you could tell us a little about like what you're currently going on. I know you're doing big girl stuff, you feel me, dissertation and things, but can you just relate that definition a little bit to some of the grassroots work that we know you all doing and how that kind of elevates this idea of intelligentsia beyond schooling?
So for example, me and my co-founder, he goes to by Zion Hamilton. When we started Making Us Matter back in April of 2020, and the goal there was, to number one, and at its start was to go ahead and fix the issues that were going to arise with individual learning. We knew which kids weren't going to get services over others, and we knew that those kids looked like us.
Mhm.
So our first approach was to create some secondary schooling so that while kids were in the interim, they still wouldn't miss it. But even when schools went back into virtual, it grew. The idea grew, what we could deliver grew, so that now it was a during the week program turned into a Saturday program. And there we're just delivering things that topics that Black kids don't always get to, that kids, period, don't get to engage about, but also that Black teachers don't get to teach in their schools. And that was what was important to us, that we bring every bit of what's happening in the life world of our students, in our own life worlds, in a regular K through 12 setting. We're told we can't talk about those things. We're told
Right.
we can't teach those things. And if we do, um, you have to watch your back about it. So this is a space where not only are students getting information. So for example, we've taught classes like Black film, perspectives of Blackness in film, hip hop ed, financial literacy, and all these things in the context of rooted in Blackness. And not only is that beneficial for students, but also very beneficial for teachers who aren't always given the creative freedom to teach that way.
Absolutely. And I think it's great to thank you for speaking on as from an educator perspective. I think a lot of times when we are trying to incite academic morale in our students, we have the position of being within the school system. So when folks are saying like, "Oh my gosh, I hate my school," you become a part of that institution, a part of that little hatred. So being able to include relevant topics, being able to include relevant perspectives and encouraging topics, it allows you to be a part of the part of school that they like. Your students are able to go back and build on themselves. Say, I've come to the table with, as a cultural stakeholder in this conversation of who we are as a people. They already have so much to bring into that conversation. So thank you so much for that. Um, I will ask, in what ways historically, especially given just your research in your field, can we say that we have seen dismantle efforts to try to dismantle the African intelligentsia? Or which ways, when we think of the intentional rebuild, is there anywhere in history where we can identify efforts that have tried to dismantle or discourage African intelligence?
Oh yeah, I mean, in the context of the United States, our very being here, like it was illegal for us to read. Um, we've always been shut out of that world. And when you look at the history of Black teachers, which is a history they don't tell us about, we see like the Brown versus Board, the unintended consequences of that were yes, schools were desegregated, but at the cost of Black teachers. That was the first stop
Right.
against Black intelligentsia, where you had whole schools that clearly weren't as resourced as white schools were, but you had schools with all Black teachers, you had all Black administrators, and it was a communal sense to it. And that is what we lost when we desegregated schools. First, you saw the erasure of Black teachers, and then secondly, you saw the mistreatment of Black students within that. So it starts from the beginning, but at every point in history, we can see. I mean, if you look at it now, like now, yes, schools are desegregated, but if you go into any traditional school, you see it ranked real quick where the kids who are in the AP and honors classes usually aren't Black children. So at every stage, we've been blocked in terms of our participation in honors courses and advanced courses, our participation in gifted courses. Black kids are gifted as hell, but often are shut out of these programs. And those are just always constant reminders, whether students realize it or not, they're definitely subconsciously getting that message, that blackness and intelligence aren't exclusive.
Absolutely. And I thank you for that too. I feel like this conversation was so necessary for us to start the series off because a lot of babies' ideas around learning, ideas around information, access to information, and the honor, the importance of education really start in the house. And if you don't feel like you're coming from, intelligent people, if you don't feel like you have access to intelligent people, then this idea of intelligence, this idea of like scholarship becomes a conversation you have outside of yourself and outside of your home. So I really appreciate, I think one of the things that draws me so much to making this matter, even like in spirit, is the fact that if there's something that doesn't exist for our people, we don't wait around for it to be created. We move and we organize to bring the things we need to our people. And I feel like that more than anything is a facet of African intelligence that regardless of our conditioning, regardless of where we're at in the world, regardless of how things have been positioned toward us, we will always be able to create institutions and create access wherever we're at. So leading into our next question, thank you so much for that, Sister Gertrude. You put that right on the nail on the hammer. I believe, like we said, this conversation should start at home for folks that are new to this conversation of home education or independent study education. What are some books and or methods that you would encourage like Black families to read, own, become familiar with, even if it's just a passage from a excerpt? Like, where should folks begin if they're having to build this inquiry from scratch, this inquiry for Black intelligence, this inquiry for information from the home? What are some books or some texts that you would prefer?
I don't have any books that I refer, but I hope I have the contribution. I just recently, my father just transitioned to be with the ancestors.
Mm,
And when you talk about Black intelligentsia and it's coming from home, um, I know every bit of where I've been in this life is because of the education that I got in my house.
great.
And that was provided by my father. And one thing that I will say that he did with my brother and I intend to continue, and I live to do this through my work, is simply the active refusal, making sure that we're not taking the words of school administrators and teachers who don't know our home lives and taking them for the gospel. My best school memory of my dad, I was in trouble all the time, like around middle school. And I remember I was in seventh grade and they called, we had a parent conference, and I was like freaking out, thinking I was going to get in trouble. And the science teacher told my father, oh, she daydreams all the time and she doesn't listen, and she's not listening to anything I say. And then like I'm sitting there like, oh shit, I'm about to get it. And my father turned around to this woman and said, well, what do you do in that situation? What do you do when she daydreams? And it was such a small moment that passed, and I don't remember even having anything clever to say back at it, but it was the first example of standing up against school systems. And one thing that, we look at these school administrators and these schools as an institution, and I think as parents, you want your children to be successful. You want your children to have every opportunity. And sometimes what we tend to do in that good faith is take the words for these schools that have no interest in our children for real. So I think from, I'm not a parent, but I had a great parent. I think that the hugest thing is to invest in your own culture. I mean, I grew up on Spike Lee joints. I grew up on jazz music. I grew up on Black artists, and Blackness was always something that was exceptional in my view. I never got to see us in the lens of a deficit because I had a father who ensured that he refused a lot of that information that I was getting in school. If we had a history project on, I remember one time Aboriginal people in Australia and in New Zealand, and I remember us coming and let me teach you this for real. So those are the things that I would say, just in terms of parenting and bringing those things at home. Like listen to your kids before we listen to these schools.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that. Um, I would also feel like when we think of African intelligentsia, the facets of African culture, just as far as our tribalism, our dependence on each other and collectivism, they also come out. We think of what are spaces that are conducive for our first and most natural minds to be nourished. What do those spaces look like? What do those teachers look like? I would ask, what role does our intelligence and kind of like our backing in a greater source of information, what role does it play in our overall liberation? Or what words would you offer for folks to align our intelligence and our study with the greater call to liberation?
Um, First, I mean, I don't think in terms of study, if the goal of your study is to get a degree, in my humble opinion, I think that's the wrong goal. I think that it's important that when we go into spaces, whether we go within the academy or we educate ourselves outside of the academy, none of that is useful if it's not intended to be shared. I tell my students all the time, like if we're doing group work, or even if you're not doing group work, if you're sitting at a table and you feel like you got the information and you good to go, what you sitting there for? Share it with somebody else. Look at your table who doesn't have that information or who might need help getting started with it, because it means nothing unless you are, if you don't share it. So I think whatever those pursuits are, for the greater good, how can I take this information? Like I had to be 38 in a doctoral program to learn the real history of Black educators. Even my father, who was a Black educator, didn't know the history of fugitivity that we have in this country.
Mm,
So I feel like it's my job to contribute in a way where this information that I'm getting that would have eluded me had I not been in this space, um, to make sure that that's available and graspable for other people, because you do not have to be a part of an academy to be educated, to
right,
get
right, right,
information
right.
at all.
And you know what? I think that's a great segue to our next question, which is really, in what ways has Black scholarship or African intelligence been, the integrity of the institution of Black scholarship been challenged? And I think some of that comes with just the lack of documentation on Black educators and Black scholarship. But if you could give us like a very specific example, you said you had to wait until you was in your doctoral program. What's an example of like how that Black scholarship and African intelligence has been intentionally dismantled or like stolen of integrity?
So, for example, my dissertation topic is on how Black educators utilize their life world experiences in order to create curriculum and pedagogy. How do we do that? How do we use what people say should be an obstacle and utilize it as an asset? And through that, I've had to read so much, looking specifically for Black K through 12 teacher experiences. Now, there's still not enough, but way more when we talk about Black educators in higher ed. You got a lot of stuff on that, though there's some research on that, but it's very thin when we talk about collecting the narratives of Black educators. And a lot of that is because number one, we're not valued. Um, and number two, how many times, even when we start as educators, and that's why it's very, no matter what, even with a doctorate under my, I'm a teacher.
Right.
That's what I am, and how often those stories don't get captured and we don't know. And that's why you have so many Black educators leaving K through 12 classrooms very rapidly, and with good reason. It's very understandable. But if there wasn't that gap in the research, if there weren't so few K through 12 Black teacher accounts, if more research and money was invested into our narratives, that could do a whole lot for bringing Black educators into the fold. All
Mhm.
right, once we have our numbers, what are we doing with that? How are we expanding beyond these institutional walls? So it has long term effects when those pieces of our identities are concealed from us, or with the intention to disrupt them.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And I feel like, you know, the mandate on, just not even as a Black educator, but as like a Black person that has access to Black children, a mandate for us is really just to be bold enough to hold our narratives true and near and dear to our heart, regardless how we go in and out of institution, whether that's as a parent, whether that's as a volunteer, if that's as a teacher, hold our narratives near and dear to our heart. When
Mhm.
we come into touch with our babies, when we come in touch with our families, let it be real. Have very brief but genuine moments of like community, and collective responsibility. Like me as a Black woman in a classroom with your Black baby, there are certain things that you should have to worry about. It's because we are also collected, extended through collective community. So I thank you so much for that. How would you, and I think I would love to hear more about your work in your dissertation, because a lot of our questions is kind of about this idea of collective responsibility beyond, this idea of institutional learning, beyond this idea of like us only having relationships to our students, to the institution. So how would you define your role as a Black educator through the lens of collective responsibility?
I think it's my responsibility to do more than just complain about the system as it is. We know what it is. Those of us who work within institutions already know. Um, it's how do you reimagine space beyond that?
Mhm.
How in this capacity do I take what I've known and create these spaces where we can exist organically?
Mhm.
Um, I'm very excited for the future, especially as we navigate through this pandemic and hopefully things lighten up and make it more easy to be face to face.
Right.
But the pandemic has shown us that education can happen outside of the institution.
Right.
And it has shown us so many possibilities to move outside of those spaces and to do so in a way that's non threatening. I remember when I first moved to the Bay Area and I was just trying to meet as many people as I could who were trying to start independent schools and just kind of hear what that struggle is like. And so many of them had to compromise the integrity of their own spaces for
Mhm.
the sake of funding. And I think that one thing that quarantine life has showed us, that like those spaces are possible. Like, of course funding is great
Right.
and
Right.
necessary, But just like anything else in our history, like we gonna find a way without it. And
Absolutely.
and I think that I love being part of a group that creates those spaces, and I'm definitely also interested in how do we connect in those different spaces. So for example, um like the work you do at West to West, how do we take this outside of the classroom and it's still an education? And furthermore, how do we take other students who are having different experiences in other parts of the country, who are having different experiences all over the world, and get them in communication and conversation together? And there's education in that too, and that can be done outside of institutional walls entirely.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I thank you so much again before always connecting the dots and what's being done, whether it's in research, whether it's in like outreach of surveying. I feel like a lot of times we are disconnected from Black people in the academy because the projects don't include information that connects right back to the community. So thank you for even in your work, your dissertation, making sure that what you're looking to uncover connects right back to community. I think our overall goal is to be the connection between people and whatever they need, whether it's information, whether it's health resources, whether it's education, whatever it is. We just need to be the connecting force between our people and everything that they need. But that comes with our folks feeling empowered and moved enough to want better and to want more access. I feel like a lot of times our families that are left to the bearings of the system, left to the bearings of however they have to find, they don't have a desire or an appetite for some of the things that we're trying to bring to our people because we become so comfortable and so complacent within the confines of this system. So, and honestly, sis, we blasted through those questions so quick, so I don't have too much more. But I do want to see like what words would you have to charge those families, to activate the feet of those mothers and fathers, who are very much so, I would say, content with what's going on in the education system for our babies. How do we go about requesting and requiring more of our Black families as it pertains to independent education and just overall buy-in to our systems, our independent systems? And what are the closing remarks, any closing remarks you have? And I will say this, just for some people who are on here are not local to Oakland. Oakland is facing the closure and the merger of over like 18 or something. So our school says, if you could speak to that just a little bit so people kind of understand the urgency of your personal mission, how y'all organize and the importance of what y'all doing in Oakland, I think that would be really, really great as well.
Yeah, so first of all, just complete heart goes to like the teachers who on a hunger strike. Last I heard this morning, they had a school board meeting and it closed like 1 a.m. and they decided they're going to close 2 schools this year, and then they're scheduled to close 5 more at the start of next year. So it's a mess. But it's a perfect example of how Black intelligentsia is being disrupted. It's a perfect example of how little Black children and Black educators are cared for. Black and Brown educators, because they are affected by this as well. Um, it just goes to that. To your comment about bringing in, I think it was beautiful to get the turnout in students that we got for our first iteration of Making Us Matter. One thing we noticed is that the students who participated were all, for the most part, children of professors. So students who were going to get that nourishment that they need. Their parents are going to see to it. So our next question was, how do we draw in the kids who would be less likely to have those things? And it's true where kids ain't gonna sign up, families ain't gonna sign up, and the truth of the matter is, I think that puts the onus on us to make it very clear why this is necessary. At what benefit is this going to be for you? And that's certainly the work that me and he goes to have our heads down thinking about, like, how do we make this very clear and communicate exactly what's going on in these systems that don't care about our kids. How do we make that clear? But also, how are we ensuring that what I have, what I'm providing, what we have in this school that we're creating, or this ed program that we're creating, how is this going to be a benefit to you? And once those lines are cleared, I do think we'll bring in the people we need. But I mean, it's a huge task and it's a tall order. And I will say, the more that I get into this work, you know, it's liberating to have these spaces, but it's also frustrating to know just how much of a chokehold these oppressive ass systems have on our people. Um, on either end of the spectrum. We got people who still like put full stock into this and don't see or understand that how rooted in anti-blackness it is, or how willing we are to accept that this is just the way it is. So I think that um more than anything, like I really think that I know that a lot of our programmings are geared towards students. I'm seeing more and more the need to have programs that are just geared towards families, period. But it has to be clearly communicated what's in it for them, as it should be. Nobody wants their kids not to have anything. Nobody wants their kids to live a life that's going to be a downward spiral. Um, so we have to make it clear that this will lead to that end, and I think that onus is on us, and not the people.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. So, just to do a quick recap, y'all, reclaiming Black intelligentsia, collective responsibility, and integrity. Well, the first way that really have to do that, we have to understand our plight. We have to be able to look back in history and bring to light the ways in which we've already been attacked, the ways in which Black scholarship and Black information has already been withheld from us. So, when we come faced with things in 2022, when they're trying to close Black schools, they're trying to black out Black educators, we know, we recognize it as a facet of anti-Black racism, period. We also have to come into the situation feeling like we are active agents of change. Sister Gertrude said the onus is on us, organizers, community educators, folks that have access to the information. Now that we know better, we have to do better. Taking our access to information, be that through the academy or our own independent study, now that we know, we have to bring it back to community. So get in touch with organizations that are doing that for Black students. Going to the most uncomfortable positions, sometimes in the community, sometimes along students who are the most vulnerable, some of the most, or they say high risk and at risk youth. We have to go find them babies and make sure they have access to our programming, make sure they have access to our educators and our scholars. I think what we have to do and what our plan is to do is to reinstitute value and pride in African intelligentsia. When people know there is so much to know on not only about ourselves, but our collective condition, our collective resistance, and so much more for us to craft and create once we are in knowledge of that, and knowledge of each other, and knowledge of what we can achieve together. We can do so much more. And a big part of that, I would say the dismantle of African intelligentsia is division amongst African intelligent people, the African intellectuals.
Mhm.
We can't even get in one room and be able to share information without doing the hierarchy of just access and the hierarchy of the academy. We can't allow those things to become to permeate our collective responsibility
Right.
because it's outside of the academy. So again, I just thank you so much for being accessible, Sister Gertrude. Always just a phone call away. Everything that y'all doing, we have kept up with Making This Matter since the very beginning, and we consider it a blessing to be in any type of fellowship with you all because we know what it takes to create something from scratch and make it make sense for our babies. So I really thank you again from the bottom of our heart, from our heart as an organization, but my heart too, just as a sister, like for being so accessible and being so real and dedicated to the work that you're doing inside and outside of the academy, making it make sense, making your degrees make sense for our people in a real way. I think that's the real call of the Bring It Home series is it's time for us to gather around. It's time to have a family meeting. We have been in school educated for years and centuries and years. At one point in history, that was not the case. At one point in history, we were blocked out and we didn't have enough Black college graduates. Now I feel like we got enough people in the room, at the table, in the academy, just to come around and say, look, y'all, what are we doing again? Could we check in on the mission? What we was getting into colleges to make sure we did what? We want
Exactly.
to make sure we was building what? Have we done that? Can we do a post check real quick? We got a lot of Black people with degrees, a lot of Black professionals, a lot of Black entrepreneurs, a lot of Black millionaires. So what's the real message? Like, what are we telling our babies to get? If all that getting, get an understanding. So we can't just be here acquiring degrees, acquiring money, acquiring wealth if we lack the greater sense of collective responsibility and African intelligence. period. West to West envisions a time and a moment in history where we can say we help rebuild the institution of Black intelligence, independent from the necessity of a colonizer, the necessity of any type of academy outside of our own. What does it look like to have an African academy, just based on the contributions of those people? So these conversations help us figure out those questions, those painstaking positions we sit in as African educators in these institutions, and not wanting to be a part of a system that is the only option right now for some of our babies. So again, Sister Gertrude, I can't thank you enough. Boom, boom. We did our little 30 minutes.
Wow.
I appreciate you so much. If there are any closing remarks you have, make sure you shout out your platform, any way that we could keep up with your work. If we get attend graduation, I don't know if it's online, but I would love to come hear you speak and present your work past this. Anything you have to say, the stage is yours.
Just thank you, thank you. On Instagram, I've been posting lately, but I'll be back on it. I like to give tips for teachers, so I'm at your favorite damn teacher, every word by underscore on Instagram. And I do want to say, for any educators, especially depending on where you are in the country right now, there is an attack on what we can teach. There's an attack on honesty. And I, from the bottom of my heart, like, giving you all the energy and love in the world. If you are teaching at one of those schools, don't button your lip. Say that shit anyway. Teach
Mhm.
it. Teach your information anyway. These school systems will put pressure. You put that pressure right back. Don't let them get away with it. Just because you in the system, don't mean you got to play by their rules.
Period. Period. And if you feel like you can't work within it, bring it home.
That's
Bring it
right.
home. Get back to the
Right.
soapbox. We'll be on the street ready to listen. Period.
That's right.
Thank you, Sister Gertrude. Have a wonderful, wonderful evening. This is West to West Movement with the first night of the Bring It Home series. Make sure y'all check out this Saturday. We'll be back at 6 p.m. PST, 8 p.m. Central, 9 p.m. Eastern, y'all. Tap in.